Good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, wherever you are, and thank you for joining the IFPMA and Medicines Australia Asia Regulatory Conference. This is our 12th iteration, and the theme for this conference is Evolving Landscapes, Asia's Role in Driving a More Efficient, Innovative, and Patient-Centric Regulatory Environment. This virtual conference is comprised of 4 days, featuring navigating reliance, practical applications, and case studies in Asia. Hot topics, e-labeling as a pathway to a future universal label, and standards harmonization featuring ICH. Next slide, please. For today, though, we are starting the conference with a focus on collaboration and work sharing to bring innovation to patients. And we're very happy that you are with us today. And please note that there is still time to register for the next few days as well, if you are interested. Next slide, please. But let's get started with a few guidelines for participants and everyone today. The conference will be held in English. The program, the speakers' biographies, additional information are all available on the conference website. Just go to arc.ifpma.org. All participants will be muted. You are asked to use the Q&A box to raise any questions when those times come up for discussions. And please note that we would like to have a very interactive session as much as possible. So we are including Zoom polls to be used during the session to get feedback from participants. And these will appear on the screen. Again, as mentioned, we encourage you to join the full conference, and the conference will be recorded, and the speakers' presentations and videos will be made available on the conference website afterwards. To get started, though, we would actually like to include a Zoom poll right now, and we are interested in asking you where you are joining us from today. You should be able to see it pop up on your screen. And the second question that we have for you is a little bit of a demographic question, in the sense we'd like to know which stakeholder group represents you best. So it would be very welcome if you could do those responses now, and we will look at how that is going and come back to that potentially in the coffee break. So please do respond. But to get started on the rest of the conference, and for our first session, we have a pre-recorded video that we've done with the patients group, and that is really to understand from them, to see how we move forward with regulatory reliance, convergence, work sharing, and collaboration, and looking at the impact that regulatory reliance and all of this has on patients. Next slide, please. Just like to briefly introduce the panelists in our video, and we have Edmund Lau, Committee Member, World Patient Alliance, Julie Cini, Director of Advocacy Beyond Borders, Karen Villanueva, President of the Philippine Alliance of Patient Organizations, and Paloma Tejada, Associate Director, Alliance Building at IFPMA, is moderating the panel session. So I'll hand it over to our organizers to please play the video.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this Fireside Chat with patients to discuss patient involvement in the regulation of medicines and health products. My name is Paloma Tejada. I'm Associate Director for Alliance Building here at the IFPMA. The IFPMA is the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations. And I have the privilege of having 3 seasoned patient advocates from the Asia Pacific region here with me today. So thank you very much for joining us. And before I introduce them to you, let me set the scene by saying that According to the EMA is the European Medicines Agency, the EMA says that input from patients as users of medicines can inform medicine development, enhance regulatory decision-making, and result in more patient-relevant outcomes. So please keep that in mind throughout this panel discussion. And let me introduce you to our panelists. We have Edmund Lau. Edmund Lau is an ambassador of the International Federation of Psoriasis Associations. And he's also a member of the Asia Pacific Regional Steering Committee of the World Patient Alliance, and he's based in Singapore. There's also Julie Sini. She's former CEO of the Spinal Muscular Atrophy Association of Australia, and is now director of another organization called Advocacy Beyond Borders. And then we also have Karen Alparce Villanueva, who is the president of the Philippine Alliance of Patient Organizations. So thank you to the three of you for joining me today on this Fireside Fireside chat. Edmund, let's start with you. You live with a chronic condition called psoriasis, and you had access to several advanced therapies to treat your condition throughout the years. If we go to your LinkedIn account, you will see that you call yourself a 10 times productive chronic patient. So you'll tell us more about that. And my question to you is, how has your life been impacted by your treatment? And how do you think your experience should be factored into the regulatory process? The floor is yours, Edmund.
Thank you, Paloma, for your kind invitation from here. Good morning, afternoon, evening, distinguished regulators, pharmaceutical leaders, and of course, esteemed stakeholders. My name is Edmund Lau, and I'm a psoriasis patient from Singapore. And living with a chronic condition like psoriasis has brought many challenges, as what Paloma has mentioned. But through access to advanced therapies, I have transformed these challenges into what I call being a 10x or 10 times productive chronic patient. And of course, when I first diagnosed, the limitation that psoriasis imposed on my life were overwhelming. The physical symptoms affected my ability to work, engage socially, and live life with confidence. However, with the right therapies, my life has been transformed. So now I am able to contribute 10 times or more to my country's GDP each year, thanks to my improved health and productivity. So in my role as a university lecturer, I'm able to teach for more than 10 hours each day on university campuses, a contribution that would not have been possible without effective treatment. If without this effective treatment, I can't even talk effectively for an hour. So access to these therapies comes at a significant cost. So take, for example, every 3 months, I need to budget approximately 3,000 Singapore dollars, equivalent to around 2,300 US dollars for my biologic treatment every 3 months. This financial burden is considerable and is one that many patients across the world may not be able to bear. So with the increased financial support from the regulators, the pharmaceutical manufacturers, or even insurance companies, the impact on both the economy and the quality of life for patients like me could be profound. So your decision have the power to extend these benefits widely, transforming not only the life of individual patients, but also the broader economy. Because there are an estimated number of 125 million people in the world living with psoriasis. So this figure is not just a health statistics. Imagine with the regulator support to all patients, and certainly it will create a lot of untapped potential for productivity, for innovation, and also social contribution in the respective countries. So with this in mind, I hope that this will be a good reason for the governments of different countries to consider.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Edmund, for sharing your lived experience with us and reminding us that quality of life and productivity are key considerations when assessing the benefits of treatments, especially for chronic conditions like yours. So thank you so much for that. Moving on to Julie. Julie Sini, you've been representing SMA patients in Australia for more than 20 years. Can I ask you, how have you, as a patient advocate, been involved in the regulatory system of your country?
Yeah, I've been involved in the regulatory system in our country in a number of different ways, through obviously drugs being reimbursed and also elevating the profile of a rare genetic disease called spinal muscular atrophy in the regulatory process. A lot of these conditions are often rare, like SMA, and people have no idea what they are, what they look like, and how they disseminate into the community. So the role of a patient advocate like myself is to do all those things. It's make sure I raise awareness, make sure I advocate for quick, precise access to these often high-cost treatments, and make sure I get the regulatory body to see the unmet need. And I do that by collecting data from an early standpoint. I collected information before there were any treatments available, and I urge anyone out there who is looking how can they do something different to support the regulatory process. And I'm really, really sold on making sure that you're collecting any sort of data, especially epidemiology data, on an early on. And I collected that over the space of about 15 years, and that gave them a better understanding of what the SMA space looked like here in Australia, how much was going to cost them, and who there was in our community. The other thing that was really poignant for us is we were able to go to what's called a consumer meeting and literally take a patient with us to be able to describe the plight of the unmet need. And for example, we had a meeting where a young girl who missed out on treatment by 3 seconds. The criteria that was that she had to sit for 30 seconds, and she missed that criteria by 3 seconds. And she described what her world looked like without access to that treatment, how she had to keep her eyes on her daughter all the time because she would obviously not be able to sit unsupported. And this was quite profound. It gives me goosebumps even talking about it now, because people in that room that day saw the unmet need, and they were originally going to pass this treatment for 25 children with type 1 SMA. That's all the application was for. And in the end, they saw how beneficial this treatment would be to those children under 18. So they decided to change their tact, and instead of just for type 1 babies, they did it for type 1, type 2, and type 3. So about 250 children were then able to have access to this treatment. And that's a win for not only our community, but for patient support groups at large, because you're able to go in, you're able to talk about your community as a consortium. You're the speaker of your community, and you're able to be a trusted advisor. You're able to give that information that you've collected, that data that you've collected over those number of years. And we would then go back to the community if we got a no, which we did for those over 18, and we would survey our community of what would it be like if you had access, how would it change your life. So we were that linchpin, I guess, and as a community organisation, as a patient organisation, that is your role. That is the role of a community representative, to be able to tell the unmet need, to be able to make sure that you're giving the plight of what this treatment or treatments would be like for those living with this condition. We were able to do what's called a patient values and perspective report, and that was really a game changer because we had all the information for them. They then had some consumers that were able to make consumer comment through their portal, but we got access after having this report, and they could see a really, really good snapshot of what the community looked like. And they're developing now these processes here in Australia where the patient organisation groups are more, their information has more weight. Well, it should, because they know their community the best. So there are a couple of ways that I've been supporting and helping the SMA community here in Australia over the last 20 years. It's been a journey, but it's the proudest thing I've ever done is to get access to these treatments. It's amazing.
Thank you so much, Julie. Thanks for sharing your amazing hands-on experience with the regulatory system in your country. And I know you have also helped patients in your region, not only in Australia. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how you managed to help other patients in other parts of the Asia-Pacific region?
Yeah, so in my new role in Advocacy Beyond Borders, I've been able to travel around our region, especially South Asia and Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. So in Sri Lanka, for example, we've got all the stakeholders that are needed at the beginning of the exercise. So coming into a virtual room, all sitting around that table, saying, okay, this is your job to go and get this information, this is your job to go and find this information, and giving each other a purpose or a task to do. And we're really kicking goals in Sri Lanka. At first there was no support from the government, but now we have that government support to be able to continue the conversation, because if we didn't get that support from the government, we couldn't then go out and talk to the doctors, because they would say, oh, there's no government support here, leave us alone. So there are people and relevant stakeholders that you need to be able to have on your team and collaborate with and cooperate with, so that you can get your message and your information out, so that a shared goal is a quick goal, and it's been wonderful to see everyone participating in this experience, so that the end goal is access to medicine quicker for these people. And we've done a lot of advocacy as well in Thailand. We went to Thailand and upskilled some local mums and dads there. And in the end, they were able to start an SMA association and start advocating for things that they really never thought about in the beginning. And that is great. One, we had a language barrier, and two, by the end of the day, everyone was so happy and excited and just raring at the bit to go, to be able to get out there and start advocating in their country. So it's been a beautiful experience, not only to do it here, but to support others. And I am such a person of service, and I just can't say how wonderful it is enough to be able to see the joy on these people's faces, that they're making a difference now, to be able to get access to medicines quicker for their communities.
Great. Thank you, Julie. Thanks for showing us the value added of involving patients every step of the way, wherever they are, right? Not only in high-income countries. So thank you so much for that. On to Karen. Karen, you've been representing the Filipino patient community for the past 10 years. Why do you think patients need to be more meaningfully involved in this in regulatory affairs?
Thank you so much, Paloma. So a little bit about who we are. We're actually the Philippine Alliance of Patient Organizations, or PAPO, is the umbrella organization of more than 50 disease-specific groups, and we see ourselves as capacitating the patient leaders of each of these groups and providing that platform to engage with government. So the reason why we need patient groups and patient leaders to be meaningfully engaged is because it's our right and duty. And this goes back as early as during the Alma Ata Declaration. And more recently, there was a World Health Assembly resolution on social participation. And that means involving ourselves more actively in shaping universal health care. And the reason why we need to be meaningfully engaging government is because it's been proven that engaging the patient voice, involving the patients in shaping healthcare policies results in policies that are more patient-centered, that address the needs, the preferences, and even the aspirations of patients. And that's why we need more patients to stand up and raise their hands and be volunteers. We are all volunteers in the work that we do, and we need to be more active and dedicated. And that involves a lot of investment in terms of our time and also in terms of competency. So we need to also build our capacity so that we can really meaningfully engage with government. Because the last thing we want to see is for tokenism to happen. So we're just simply a check in the list of, oh, we consulted the patient community, oh, we consulted civil society. We need to be able to equip ourselves so that we understand what are the policies that will drive change. We need to understand the healthcare system. We need to understand our diseases, and we need to speak authentically about, and that's the value of patients or people with lived experience, like Edmund and Julie and many other patient advocates across the region. The power of storytelling is really very, very important. And our ability also to be able to merge together our understanding of how the healthcare system works and what are the needs of patients and how we advocate and how we tell our stories is very important.
Karen, you said equip ourselves. I think that's very important to remember. That patients want to be more vocal, but they need to equip themselves. And maybe you want to tell us how they can equip themselves. How can they build their own capacities in order to be more relevant and to be more meaningfully engaged and not to be a token, like you said before, at the table.
So what we've done under PAPO is we invited 25 patient leaders to undergo a healthcare leadership and management course at the Asian Institute of Management in order to build not just their skills, but also their confidence and their ability also to drive leadership and understand how the health ecosystem works. We did this, and it, as I said, it's an investment of time because all these patient leaders had to invest 13 Saturdays, including time to work on their projects. So it's been we started it only last year, and we're looking at a second cohort for next year. Because the challenge is also to be able to find committed leaders who will do the work. The work that we do is not easy. As I said, it takes a lot of commitment in terms of time and resources as well, personal resources. But it's very fulfilling because you see not just the transformation of individual leaders, but even the transformation of the patient organization in their capacity to advocate and also in their capacity to drive change for their specific disease. So in the Philippines, meaningful patient engagement is still a continuing journey. We're not yet there, but we have we've already achieved quite a number of milestones in terms of being meaningfully engaged. But we continue to advocate, we continue to be present, because the important thing is even just showing up for those meetings that government calls. That takes a lot of time and commitment, because the meetings, they tell us about the meetings sometimes in the last minute, but we still need to show up. And when we can't do that, we need to tap other leaders beyond the board of PAPO. So that's been the journey, and it's quite exciting, especially now that there's already a World Health Resolution on social participation. So we will see a growing trend to invite patient leaders and patient organizations for their perspectives. And that's good for everyone. That's good for the patients. That's good for the health system. That's good for everyone.
Yes, thank you, Karen, and I'm very impressed by all the work that you do to empower patients in your country and in your region. Like you said, building leadership skills, confidence, that's a key word, because a lot of these regulatory processes and policies at the national level can be very intimidating for regular people, right? Like patients. You don't choose to be a patient. So thanks for all that work and for sharing your insights with us. And I think this will be the perfect segue for my last question, which will be to all of you, which is if you had to summarize in one word or a few words, what is the most needed to involve patients in the regulatory process, what would that be? So what is the key word for you that describes the need, what is needed by patient leaders to be more involved in the regulatory process? Should I start with Edmund? Please go ahead.
Well, definitely. Thanks for asking this very important question, Paloma. As a legally trained individual, I always emphasize one word called equity, which is fairness and justice. So I really hope that the regulators can incorporate some of the patient story like myself and don't just simply look into the clinical outcome and the safety profile.
Thanks.
So
Julie, what would that be for you?
thank you very much for asking.
For me, it would be start early, but definitely get involved, because without being involved, you can't evoke change. Excellent.
And Karen, what would that be? What is most needed to involve patients?
For me, it's the mechanism as well as the leadership and political will. It's mainly for government to ensure that the mechanisms are in place and that there is political will to involve patients. And of course, for patients to have the competency and the investment in time and resources to show up and to give, to reflect the views of their communities.
Great. Thank you so much to the three of you for your time and for your willingness to share with us your valuable insights on from the patient's perspective on regulatory affairs and policy more broadly. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that. I think it's really important that, we have engagement with so I think it's really important that we had this opportunity to hear from the patient advocates today, because it's always important for us to remember why we're here. as national regulatory authorities, as stakeholders, as industry in the pharmaceutical industry. And I think it's really important that we see how patients are becoming more and more involved in how they're working with NRAs and others to better the lives of patients universally. So we're very excited that we were able to share that with you. If we go to the next slide, we would like to introduce our first keynote speaker today. Felicity Jameson is a director, Regulatory Strengthening Section, International Regulatory Branch, Medicines Regulation Division at the Therapeutic Goods Administration in Australia. And today she is going to speak to us about the Indo-Pacific Regulatory Strengthening Program. And we would like to just remind you that there will be some Zoom poll questions occurring during her session. So please watch out for those as we value your participation. And I think in the interest of time, we'll hand over to you, Felicity. Thank you very much. Next slide, please.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Felicity Jamieson, and I'm from Australia's Therapeutic Goods Administration, where I'm the Director of the International Regulatory Branch's Regulatory Strengthening Section. As the name suggests, my section is funded by the Australian Government to work with counterparts to strengthen regulatory systems within the Indo-Pacific region. And I'm delighted to be presenting to you today on the Regulatory Strengthening Program. Next slide, please. I'd like to start by providing some background to the program and its inception. In October 2017, the Australian Government launched a 5-year, $300 million health security initiative to contribute to the avoidance and containment of infectious disease threats. Under this broad initiative set key elements of access to medical products and creating stronger health systems. The TGA was allocated a small slice of the total HSI funding envelope. Next slide, please. Following a design phase, the Indo-Pacific Regulatory Strengthening Program, to be led by the TGA, was launched in October 2018 and incorporated 7 countries in Asia Pacific: Myanmar, Laos, Cambodia, Indonesia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Papua New Guinea. Improved regulatory practices and regional coordination sat at the very heart of the RSP. Access to priority medicines to treat diseases with a high regional burden, such as malaria and tuberculosis, was a key consideration. Support from the TGA involved in-country visits from regulatory scientists to sit side by side with colleagues in other regulatory agencies and review data, discuss the interpretation of guidelines, and consider best practices. The TGA was provided with a dedicated funding to deliver this program. Next slide, please. A little over 1 year into the delivery phase of the RSP, the COVID-19 global pandemic was upon us and the world pretty much entered lockdown. The Foreign Minister announced the $500 million Australian Vaccine Access and Health Security Initiative in October 2020 to support efforts to develop, approve, and deliver effective vaccines across the Indo-Pacific. And through this initiative, millions of doses of COVID vaccines were shared with our neighbouring countries to assist with their national immunisation plans and help protect the health of the region. Next slide, please. The TGA was provided with additional funding to support an additional program, which covered the countries that had been participating in the RSP, but now incorporated Malaysia and the Philippines in Southeast Asia, and Pacific countries for the first time, including Timor-Leste, Fiji, Tuvalu, Palau, Samoa, Tonga, Kiribati, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, and Nauru. Again, this constituted but a small portion of the total of VASI funding. The TGA's support included sharing regulatory information relating to the pre-market assessment of vaccines that had been approved by the TGA, additional manufacturing sites, scale-up, shelf life extensions, and GMP certification. We also shared information regarding APHIS and assisted with NITAID considerations through the provision of scientific advice. During this time, both of the TGA programs were resourced with a regional advisor based in Singapore at the High Commission and a team of regulatory scientists in Canberra. Program delivery shifted to online support where we continue to build connections and provide training in these challenging circumstances. Both programs were successfully completed in June 2023. Next slide, please. I would now like to spend some time situating Australia's commitment to regulatory strengthening within broader policy objectives and goals. In 2023, Australia's Southeast Asian Economic Strategy to 2040 was launched. Within that strategy lay a recommendation to expand the RSP to build the capacity of regional regulators. Regulatory collaboration and joint assessments are seen as a means to achieve market access for essential products. Recognition, reliance, and the exchange of information underpin the regulators' efforts to support timely access to quality-assured, safe and efficacious products. We're now going to launch a Zoom poll, so please feel free to provide your answers during this session. Next slide, please. In 2023, Australia launched a new international development policy for the first time in a decade. Development programs support peaceful, stable and prosperous future for Australia and the region, and assistance is responsive to the needs of partner countries. Next slide, please. The International Development Policy itself specifically refers to health system strengthening. It's important to remember that health systems are struggling to provide universal care and require effective institutions such as medical product regulators. The policy also stipulates that diverse voices are heard, including those of women and girls, and they're engaged in a meaningful way. We will start with development programs from a place of respect and an appreciation of the strengths and interests that all partners bring to the table. Next slide, please. The Australian Foreign Minister then went on to announce the Partnerships for a Healthy Region initiative, which is aimed at improving the health and wellbeing of communities across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, and to assist with the region's recovery from the shock of the COVID-19 pandemic. Next slide, please. The 5-year initiative was launched in February 2023 and sought to expand health assistance provided to the region by key Australian government agencies and organisations. The TGA's RSP was to continue, and with an expanded scope at that. Next slide, please. So in terms of the participating countries, all of those that were already part of the RSP and those that were involved in the COVID vaccine program were then incorporated into this continuing RSP. And in addition, Niue, the Republic of Marshall Islands, and the Federated States of Micronesia were also included. So now the RSP involves 22 countries in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And I'd just like to mention that work with Myanmar is currently on hold. Next slide, please. So this speaks to the design of the regulatory strengthening program. It incorporates 3 targeted capacity building themes. The quality is the first theme, and that involves pre-market assessment of quality and manufacturing controls, GMP, lab testing, addressing substandard and falsified products, and also post-approval changes. The next theme is safety and efficacy. So this involves assistance with the pre-market assessment of safety and efficacy, but also post-market surveillance, RMPs, medicine defects, adverse event reporting, causality assessments, and recalls. The risk communication theme encompasses the role of the regulator in keeping external stakeholders informed, but also our role in promoting the quality use of medicines. We also have cross-cutting themes that relate to tools such as the SOPs, templates, and policy and legal frameworks that regulators need to perform efficiently. We built right into the program design reliance and cooperation, because we really think that this is so key to strengthening regulators across the region. And we also have a cross-cutting theme of gender equality, disability, and social inclusion, because we want to make sure that everybody's voice is heard and considered in program design. Next slide, please. So the RSP offers regulatory system strengthening to the participating countries that have a national regulatory authority. and they're listed here. I won't read them out again. This involves planned activities, in-country training, and targeted capacity building. We also have another stream of responsive regulatory support that runs across all the 22 countries involved in the program. And this is really an on-call service where people will reach out to us for assistance when a local problem arises. Next slide, please. So what do we use as a guide when planning specific activities and our capacity building? Well, the TGA works in very close partnership with the WHO at the headquarters, regional and the country office level. The WHO's global benchmarking tool provides a framework for determining the maturity of a regulatory agency from those that have no formal or a reactive approach and ensure quality through reliance to those that have a more stable functioning system. With an estimated 30% of countries globally having a regulatory agency at the ML3 or above level, the need for strengthening is evident. Next slide, please. So this slide just provides you with an overview of the steps involved in a GBT assessment. It's quite a lengthy process. There are multiple steps and it can take several years. And it runs all the way from initial self-benchmarking, where the agency scores themselves against the criteria, right through to a formal benchmarking, which will result in the assignation of a maturity level. Next slide, please. So the RSP team aligns its plans with the GBT level of the relevant agency, if it's known, and it works to reduce the gaps, address deficiencies, and follow any available institutional development plans. Historically, the TGA in Australia is a stringent regulatory agency. The WHO has recently introduced the concept of a WHO listed authority, which is to replace or has replaced the concept of an SRA with more robust methodology of the GBT. So TGA, we do hope to achieve the status of a WLO to cement our role in international regulation and also to be in a position to continue to offer technical assistance to work towards an increase in maturity in other agencies. So our staff within our team have supported GBT assessments in PNG, in Timor-Leste, in the Philippines, in Singapore, and the Republic of Korea through the RSP. And such assistance to the WHO's process wouldn't be feasible without this external funding support from the Australian government. Next slide, please. And so here are just some action shots of the September 2024 pre-benchmarking exercise that we helped out with in PNG. The TGA provided an experienced regulatory scientist to assist with the exercise in Moresby as part of a team convened by the WHO's Western Pacific Regional Office. Next slide, please. I would like to delve a little bit deeper now into the types of regulatory support provided by the TGA through the RSP, as the program is unique and it may provide a model for consideration. I've listed the three main activity types: product-specific support for market authorization, activities that are centred on broader capacity building, and also the responsive technical assistance part of the program. As we like to say, we're unique. Next slide, please. So firstly, I would like to acknowledge that there are several impressive global initiatives involving cooperation between regulators that are aimed at achieving timely access for priority products. And these include the Access Consortium, of which the TGA is a part, the US FDA-led Project Orbis, which is focused largely on oncology products, the EU M4All, and Swissmedics MAG-HP. And these are pathways for the approval of global health products, which is fantastic. All of these offerings require open dialogue between applicants or industry and the agencies, and they're supported by sharing of relevant information, such as industry filing strategies. Objectively assessing the value of current initiatives and approaches is necessary if we are able to refine them and also achieve some common goals. The voices and perspectives of industry are critical, and this is why I'm honoured to be speaking to you today, because I want to ask the question, what opportunities are there for us in our region, in Asia Pacific? Next slide, please. One such multilateral mechanism is the ASEAN Joint Assessment, and the TGA has supported joint assessments for tafenoquine, cabotegravir, and ocrelizumab through the RSP. This support has involved the provision of unredacted TGA evaluation reports, our requests for information, and a round 2 evaluation as well, external expert advice referrals, delegates overviews. RSP staff have assisted with the interpretation of guidelines, the resolution of deficiencies, and assessing the overall risks and benefits in context. RSP staff participate in the technical meetings and are on call for support to the lead agencies and those participating from ASEAN member states. All of this support has been provided in conjunction with the sponsor, and all of the products have already been approved for use in Australia. Next slide, please. So the TGA is in a good position to provide sustained bilateral support as well. And here's an example relating to the antimalarial tafenoquine, which we supported the Thai FDA in their review of the product dossier. So the TGA approved tafenoquine in 2018, and then we went on to support the Thai FDA throughout their evaluation. The Thai FDA, in our estimation, approved the product 111 days faster than the target timeframe in 2019. As I've previously outlined, tafenoquine was then subject to an ASEAN joint assessment, and it's also received approval by the Philippines FDA in 2022. In 2024, Thailand began the rollout of tafenoquine to treat those over 16 years old. And Medicines for Malaria Adventure press release this year states that Brazil and Thailand are the first endemic countries to launch the new single-dose radical cure to prevent P-Vivax relapse. The TGA has also approved the paediatric formulation, and we're hopeful that regulatory reliance will be further utilised in the region. Next slide, please. So what does this support look like behind the scenes? Well, the TGA was present at a WHO workshop with the Thai FDA in July 2019. We then visited them at their premises in Bangkok to focus on CMC and clinical aspects of the review. The Thai FDA Bureau of Drug Control and Health Products Vigilance Centre then came to Canberra pretty much immediately afterwards. Another workshop was then held by the WHO in September to focus on post-market aspects. So you can see that over a period of 4 months, strong relationships were forged to facilitate technical assistance and knowledge of each other's regulatory frameworks. Next slide, please. Through the RSP, the TGA has also provided product-specific support for the market authorization of novel anti-HIV products and a gene therapy for spinal muscular atrophy. And we estimate that this has led to significantly shorter review times. I would like to pause to reflect that these activities have not just been about product approval. Along the way, many insights into the regulatory science and interpretation of guidelines have been exchanged. A pre-market review can also therefore be capacity building and can lead to an increase in technical understanding. Next slide, please. And actually, if you just work your way through the animation in this slide, that would be great. Thank you. The RSP team is proud to support the Fiji MRA in a capacity building sense as they seek to develop their regulatory functions. There is no requirement for products to be registered prior to importation in Fiji, and the MRA are aspiring to ensure quality in the products they do approve and those that are selected for procurement by the public hospital system. The RSP has provided assistance in relation to considerations of how to ensure quality, what standards to adopt, and how to best utilise reliance and communicate with the industry and the applicants. Next slide, please. The RSP team is also available, this is the third type of assistance, to provide assistance during emergencies. And earlier this year, we became aware of a critical shortage of essential medicines in a country in our region. We were able to assist through an in-country visit of pharmacists to work with staff on the ground to ensure that the supplies that had been delivered were logged, handled, and then stored appropriately. Next slide, please. I would just like to wrap up by touching on who our stakeholders are, because it is quite a galaxy of different organisations. Regulatory strengthening through a development assistance program is more complex than you might imagine. Our stakeholders range from partner countries, UN agencies, WHO at all levels, to our product development partners, donors, other SRAs, and organisations that also offer technical assistance, and of course the regulated entities within the pharmaceutical industry. The number of parties to consult can be overwhelming, but we're supported by a solid program design with clear boundaries and working within existing guidelines and tools offered by the WHO, the ICH, and the Pharmacopoeia. Next slide, please. And so here are just some action shots of the team as they do their work. These taken over the years. Our work is very diverse and we find ourselves everywhere, from sitting at a desk next to a chemistry evaluator in Laos, to online webinars like this one with hundreds of people on the line, to hotel conference venues, to laboratories. Next slide, please. So thank you for your attention today. I hope I've given you a taste of what the RSP has to offer. Do feel free to get in contact directly through rsp@health.gov.au if you've got any follow-up questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Felicity. Great job in explaining to us about, what the RSP actually does and the depth and the breadth of the program and the support given by TGA. It's really great to see the work that's being done with the partners in the region. So thank you for this. And to everybody online, do note that Felicity's presentation will be posted on our website. Now I'd like to move on to our second keynote this morning, and I'd like to introduce Marie Valentin from the World Health Organization. She's the team lead for Facilitated Product Introduction, Regulation and Safety Unit, Regulation and Prequalification at the WHO. And she's here to talk to us about collaboration and work sharing to bring innovation to patients. And I think we're just going to go ahead, Marie, and let you get started. So please do go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Janice, and thank you very much to IFPMA and Medicines Australia, an organizer, for inviting us to be at the table today and during this week for this very important conference on the Asian Regulatory Conference. So I'm just going to talk about how can we do to strengthen collaboration and work sharing to bring innovation to patients. My name is Marie Valentin, as Janice has mentioned, and I'm the team lead for the team Facilitated Product Introduction at WHO headquarters in Geneva. So our team supports all the member states with the reliance mechanism to facilitate access to quality assured medical products. Next slide, please. So we know medical products are a key instrument for public health. It's one of the Sustainable Development Goals, so the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal, and the SDG 3 for good health, indicate that to achieve universal health coverage, to include financial risk protection, but access to quality essential healthcare services, and very importantly, access to safe, effective, quality and affordable essential medicine and vaccines for all. So we know that if we're trying to achieve the universal health coverage for any patients anywhere where you might be, to have access to good and quality assured healthcare services and healthcare medical products, medicine and vaccine are a very important tool as part of this landscape. Next slide, please. But in reality, we know that access to quality assured medical products still remains a challenge globally. And we know that we've got an estimated of 2 billion people that may not have access to essential medicine. So shutting them down from the quality medicine and the healthcare that they should have access to. The reasons are many, and there are several reasons. In terms, we know that the resources available and the healthcare structure available in the different countries are very different. So it's linked to the difference in resources, but also it could be linked to the fact that we could work more efficiently. So we could try to use the resources that are available in a better way and try to be more efficient in using the resources that are available globally. Next slide, please. So what do we talk about regulatory system strengthening? So, and it was good to listen to the presentation from Felicity. I think it was a nice segue, as she mentioned some of the tools that we have. So if we look at the 194 member states that WHO supports, we can see that 135 countries, so 70% of the countries are still at maturity level 1 or 2. So they haven't reached the stable, well-functioning and integrated regulatory system that we're aiming for. So the aim is to have as many countries as possible at maturity level 3, which is a stable and functioning regulatory system that allows to control the medical products that are entering the markets. So we see that the landscape, the regulatory landscape globally is very diverse and also very diverse in terms of resources and maturity level. And we know that all the regulators around the globe are facing many challenges, and this is valid for all the regulators, regardless of the maturity level, because we know that there is a very complex supply chain with the manufacturing happening at different parts of the world. There is a complexity of the global clinical trial programs. We know that there is a high level of transparency that is requested for regulatory authorities. So really, across the globe, all the regulators are facing challenges. So that is why we are encouraging reliance to try to make a best use of the resources available. The regulatory system strengthening program at WHO is based on two main work streams. One is to work very closely with member states to build their capacity system, and we work with many partners. So it was very good again to see all the TGA support in the region. We work with many partners in terms of trying to work with countries to assess their maturity levels through the global benchmarking tool and to define a roadmap under the institutional development plan to see how can they build their capacity and how can they strengthen the regulatory system. So this is done in accordance with the WHO good regulatory practices that were issued in March 2021. In the meantime, also, we can see that a lot of countries have suboptimal regulatory system. So we have to ensure that we can facilitate and support access to quality assured medical products in those countries. That is why we are promoting regulatory cooperation, convergence, work sharing, and reliance to try to use the resources as best as we can and to facilitate access to quality assured products in all these countries where maybe the regulatory system is not optimal. Next slide, please. So this is to give you a bit of a picture on the map. So we can see, and Felicity has mentioned the different steps in terms of the use of the global benchmarking tool. So the global benchmarking tool is a very objective tool with over 260 indicators to rate the 9 regulatory functions. So for example, marketing authorization, clinical trials, to look at what is the setting for these different regulatory functions in countries. And it starts usually with a self-benchmarking. So it is to use the tool, so for the country, in collaboration with partners, to look at where they're at for these different indicators and these different regulatory functions. So we can see that many member states have used the self-benchmarking. And then we move to the formal benchmarking, which is coordinated by WHO with many also evaluators from different parts of the world and different partners. And we can see that there's been a lot of work in terms of benchmarking many of these member states, covering a large proportion of the population in the world. As Felicity has mentioned also, we are in a transition period. So you may remember we used to refer to the term stringent regulatory authorities, and this was linked to the membership, to the ICH membership pre-October 2015. So it was set in stone, and there was a list of stringent regulatory authorities. The WHO listed authorities framework was created as an evidence-based transparent system to try to design who are the regulatory that we can use as reference. And I think it was also to give opportunity to new and upcoming regulatory authorities, because the stringent regulatory authorities term was really set in stone and there was no opportunity to welcome new reference authorities. So that's why the WHO listed authority was created to allow for an evidence-based and transparent system to design which regulatory can be a regulatory of reference. As I mentioned, we are in the transition phase, so from March 2022 to March 2027, and we know that some of the stringent regulatory authorities have transitioned already to WLA, and there are more to come, some more are being evaluated. Next slide, please. So what have we seen in the recent years? I think we've seen that the plant of reliance have been growing very well. And I think it's a collective effort from all the stakeholders. So from the industry, from the regulators, from the partners, the donors, we can see that there is a growing use of reliance. And COVID-19 as well was a strong accelerator for the use of reliance. And I think the regulators, I always say, I think there is a before and after COVID, and really the response to COVID wouldn't have been possible without the use of this reliance chain that was put between regulators and the highest level of collaboration. Next slide, please. So how have we been watering this plan? So just to say that first, this plan has some strong roots. So we know that there is a long history of improving efficiency through reliance. And if we look at the certificate of pharmaceutical product, for example, that is a tool that has been used for 70 years, more than 70 years. And we can see that that was already the spirit of how can I facilitate the circulation of products and facilitate the registration in other countries using the scientific evaluation that has already been performed. We have to highlight as well that reliance is embedded in the WHO global benchmarking tool. So we, in many of the indicators, for example, marketing authorization, inspection, batch release, the national system, pharmacovigilance, etc., there is an encouragement or recommendation to use reliance where possible. So in the GBT, when we work with country, we always ask ourselves 3 questions. Where can I rely? So where is there a source that I can use to facilitate my work? Where can I work together? So where can I work share? And the last one is, what do I need to do alone? So for example, the safety monitoring in country has to be performed by the local national regulatory authorities. We've released some documents, so the WHO Good Regulatory Practices and the Good Reliance Practices in March 2021. And we can see that also reliance, as I mentioned, was essential for the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And currently we are dealing with mpox outbreaks in many countries in Africa. And again, reliance was essential in terms of facilitating the emergency use authorization of vaccine in those countries to try to facilitate the response to mpox. What we can see is that currently reliance is used by all the regulatory authorities. So regardless the level of resources or the level of maturity, and even the best resource authorities are using reliance in their day-to-day work in terms of facilitating their work and trying to avoid duplication. For the future, what we're looking at is really to promote informed reliance. So in the past, maybe some 15 years ago, some regulators would say, oh, this has been authorized by this authority, I'm going to authorize it, without the assurance that it was the same product, that they're the same dossier, etc. So we really want to promote informed reliance. And by informed reliance, we mean that the regulators should have all the quality, safety, and efficacy data in their hands to have an informed decision and to make sure that they can assess and monitor the risk-benefit of the product throughout the life cycle. We see also an increase of the use of reliance in further regulatory functions and also of work sharing. So we will be discussing, for example, in post-authorization changes, we see that the landscape is changing. And to try to help countries and develop more guidance for practical implementation of reliance. Next slide, please. We know that reliance can take many shapes and forms, and we know that historically, for example, where the regulatory authorities were working very independently and they were doing their own evaluation, their own inspection, there was a high level of duplication and a high workload. Whereas if we move to a more collaborative effort in terms of work sharing or outreach pathways where we use already some of the output or where we share the workload. So I know that during the program later today, we will talk about access, for example, which is a great example in terms of work sharing and sharing the workload between authorities in terms of dispatching the different modules, etc. So there are many shapes and forms of reliance. It's very important for regulatory authority to look at which one makes more sense in terms of their needs, in terms of their opportunity for reliance. What we want to highlight is that the sovereignty is always maintained. So this is very, very important. So there is no reliance is not outsourcing of the regulatory function. There is always the independence and the sovereignty of the regulatory authorities. They are the one deciding and giving the green light to which products enter their markets. But we are trying to promote a more efficient use of the resources and to decrease duplication where possible and increase the trust and the collaboration. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you a bit of information where to find some additional information. So the main document is the WHO Good Reliance Practices. We also have released a short e-learning module. So it's like 22 minutes. It's available in English, in Spanish, and in French. It's open access, so please use it and also disseminate it within your organization. It's free access, so it can be shared widely. That explain the high-level principle of reliance and what are the different principles and possibility for reliance. We also work very closely with the International Pharmaceutical Regulators Program, and we've released a question and answer, the most frequent question and answer on reliance. And recently, we are happy to announce as well that we released a repository, so a reliance repository with all the current model of reliance used in the different part of the world. So, and also Felicity have mentioned some of them in terms of access, the Project Orbis, and the EM4, the MHGHP, etc. So a lot of the reliance mechanisms that are currently happening in the different part of the world are presented in this repository with link to additional information. Next slide, please. So when we prepare for this session, also some of the colleagues were asking, so how does WHO also use the reliance? And at WHO, so we do what we preach, and we also look at risk-based approach, and we also use reliance and work sharing where possible. So when we look at the WHO pre-qualification, for example, of medicine and vaccine, they will always look if there is already an evaluation available to facilitate, and there's a possibility to have a bridge evaluation with using the reference authority. There is even also the possibility to have an alternative. So alternative is just a listing, so they do not duplicate the evaluation, but for medicine, they will indicate, for example, that a product has received a UM for all or a US FDA tentative approval. We also work very closely with all our different regulators for the inspections, and we try to either co-inspect or use also the inspection that have already been done. And also the WHO works very closely with a PIC system as a scheme. So we try to, we use what is available and try not to duplicate inspection when not required. There is a program within WHO called the WHO Collaborative Registration Procedure, where it is reliance in action. We facilitate the registration of medical products in countries by providing the evaluation report and the inspection report, either from stringent regulatory authorities or from the WHO pre-qualification team. So really, we try to provide this evaluation and inspection report for the countries to have an informed decision and to facilitate their decision at national level. And the CPP that has been supported for many, many years by WHO, the scheme as well. And as I mentioned, in terms of responding to pandemic and responding to outbreaks, reliance is key and is very essential. There was a little article from the experience from the COVID-19, and we could see that for the COVID-19 vaccines, for example, for one of the vaccine, we got the approval in countries, so 110 countries approved in 15 days for the use of the vaccine. So it was never seen before in terms of accelerating and working all together as a chain of reliance from the reference authority to the EUL to the emergency use authorization in country to facilitate access as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. So we know that harmonization is a facilitator of reliance, but it's not a prerequisite. We know we've been working on harmonization for many years, and we know that there's not full harmonization, for example, in terms of Module 1. However, we can always use reliance and it's always used on a voluntary basis, so we can always use reliance despite not full harmonization. But I wanted to acknowledge here also all the great work done at regional level and at global level in terms of facilitating harmonization and facilitate this common language for application. Next slide, please. And in the region, we've got a great example as well under the ASEAN joint assessments. And we've been seeing many great progress in the recent years. And here we have to acknowledge the great support from the TG Australia and all the partners like PMDA Japan, etc. We've seen that this has been very instrumental in terms of the country implementing reliance in their system, and also increasing the collaboration and the work sharing between all these member states. So we are very happy to see the great progress of the Asian joint assessments, and we've got quite a few products in the pipeline for the upcoming months and years. Next slide, please. Just to finish, so a few words on the WHO listed initiative, as I mentioned. So we are in the transition phase from March 2022 to March 2027. And the aim of WHO listed authorities is really to facilitate authorities to know which regulatory they can rely on. And the listing is done also by regulatory function. So to really indicate it, to indicate which regulatory function, for which regulatory function this authority is considered as a WHO listed authority. Next slide, please. And we thought, so last year was extremely busy. We already have so at the end of last year, we had the first three WHO listed authorities. So it was Swissmedic, MFDS Korea, and HSA Singapore. And next slide, please. And we also, so this year, earlier this year, we had the announcement of the WLF for the European regulatory network, so the European Commission, the European Medicines Agency, and the 30 national competent authorities of the US FDA, and there was an additional function as well for HSA Singapore. Many of these regulators, so there is also some evaluation ongoing, so from some SRA, but also some new authorities that were not SRA before, that have got through the GBT and the performance evaluation. What is very important to understand for this WHO listed authority is that it starts with having a maturity level 3 as a minimum, but there is a performance evaluation because the GBT looks at what legislation and what process, what guidelines are in place, but you might have the best structure for the house, but we want to look at what is the output. So what do the evaluation reports look like? What are the inspection are performed? So it's very important to have this performance evaluation in terms of defining the WHO listed authorities. And with that, I'd like to move to the next slide, please. Yes, just to mention for the post-authorization changes, we see that the landscape and the needle is changing. We see very many exciting pilots, and I know there is a dedicated session this week on post-authorization changes. In the IFPMA, the International Conference for Medicine Regulatory Authority, with the pharmaceutical quality knowledge management system, with work sharing from some of the stringent regulatory authorities, and also many industry-led pilots where for key significant changes to the marketing authorization to use reliance, so to use a reference authority, for example, the European Medicines Agency or Health Canada, to facilitate the approval, and instead of looking at 4 to 5 years to have a rollout of a key manufacturing change, for example, to try to have these changes approved within 6 months in 40 or 50 countries. So we've seen some great results, and I think collectively we can better define and look at models to use reliance for post-authorization changes. And I think it will be a very interesting session this week. Next slide, please. So we've seen that it's essential for all regulators to have reliance in their regulatory functions. We have to all work together. So the conferences like this week in terms of open dialogue with the industry are essential and are very important in moving the project forwards. We see some new opportunities for reliance with the new WLF framework and some new regulatory authority joining the group. And we have to better define together a way to manage this high workload of post-authorization changes. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the next sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marie. That was a very great presentation talking about what WHO is doing on regulatory reliance and good regulatory practices amongst the member states. And it's good to hear that the NRAs are taking reliance on board and are strongly supported by engagement with industry. So thank you so much for that. So now we're going to move to a short break, which then we will kick off our discussion around the Access Consortium. So we have about 14 minutes, and we do ask everybody to join us back at the top of the hour. So that's 9 a.m. CET. See you then. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tam Vo. I'm from Medicines Australia, the Senior Manager of Policy. I co-chair Medicines Australia's Regulatory Affairs Working Group, and thank you IFPMA for inviting Medicines Australia to partner in this very important conference for over the next 4 days. The next session on day 1 of the conference, part 2, is on Access Consortium. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers. We have Leonard Both, who will present an overview of the Access Consortium. And we have panelists, including 2 industry representatives, Michelle Cheng from AbbVie, based in Singapore, and Helen Critchley from Sanofi, based in Australia. We have 4 of the 5 Access Consortium country partners on the panel today. We have Freddie Fu from Health Sciences Authority from Singapore, Joelle Raffel from Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency in the UK, and Michael Wiseman from the Therapeutic Goods Administration. We're very fortunate to have at least 4 of the 5 Access Consortium partners here today. The time zone was a little bit difficult for our Canadian access partners. But firstly, I would like to hand over to Leonard Both, who will provide an overview of the Access Consortium, and then we'll open up to the panelists, and where I'll invite Janice back to moderate the panel questions. But over to you, Leonard. Thank you so much.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Leo Both, and I work for Swissmedic. Next slide, please. And next slide, please. Okay, so just briefly for background, there's a growing awareness of the need for regulators to work together, and global collaboration between agencies is urgently needed. Therefore, the Access Consortium is exploring approaches to ensure deeper collaboration. This work has been going on for quite some time, but our work has recently also been expanded to include new products such as ATMPs, as well as activities such as inspections and regulatory advice to companies. So this session here today will explore how the Access Consortium partners have been working together and what that collaboration could look like in the future. Next slide, please. All right, so this is essentially the mission statement, which is taken directly from the new Access Consortium website. It mentions in there that our main goal is to maximize international cooperation, to reduce duplication, and to increase each agency's capacity to ensure patients have timely access to high quality, safe, and effective medicines. Next slide, please. All right, so for those who do not yet know the Access Consortium, it comprises the 5 agencies on the right side. Before 2021, meaning before Brexit, it was called the ACSS Consortium for Australia, Canada, Singapore, and Switzerland. And then after Brexit, when the MHRA left the EMA network, it joined the consortium, and it was relabeled as the Access Consortium. Next slide, please. So this is the structure of the Access Consortium, and I hope I've included all of the work streams here, including the newer ones. So at the top, you've got the heads of agencies who meet frequently. You have a rotating chair so that each of the 5 agencies is in charge of the Access Consortium at some point. Obviously, it then rotates around. And then you've got your different work streams underneath the heads of agencies, such as, for instance, on the left side, the work-sharing groups for new actives, for biosimilars, and for generics. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the Access Consortium strategic plan up to 2024. Obviously, we're now coming to the end of that particular strategic plan, and the next strategic plan for the future is already in the works. So this is probably also a good time, and also in the panel discussion right after this, to discuss what's been working well and what could potentially be improved. Next slide, please. So I won't mention all of the strategic objectives here in any detail, but just to briefly mention also before our panel discussion that there were 3 main areas. The first area was related to strengthen access work-sharing initiatives. The second area was related to expand the life cycle approach, including clinical trials, pharmacovigilance, GXP activities, etc. And the third area was related to push regulatory innovation. Next slide, please. So when we put together this particular strategic plan here, also various indicators of success were established. I appreciate that. I believe we're going to discuss this in a panel discussion afterwards. But yeah, you see those various indicators of success here on this particular slide. And I would say that one of the most important indicators of success, if not the most important indicator of success, is that first one here, namely an increase in applications to access at the same time or soon after filed with other major medicines regulators. And obviously we're referring to the FDA and the EMA there. Next slide, please. All right, just to mention one example here for successful access collaboration. So this is taken from the Access Consortium guideline for variant vaccines. This is a guideline we published a number of years ago. So this work involved many discussions and interactions between the access partners to discuss what the regulatory requirements for a COVID variant vaccine would look like. And I would say this was indeed a very successful collaboration because it resulted in the publication of this particular guideline here. So all of the access partners were able to agree on what those requirements for variant vaccines would look like. And then also all of the access partners relatively soon afterwards then also approved variant vaccines, with the UK's MHRA being the first regulator in the world to approve a variant vaccine in August 2022. You can see the whole guideline online. Next slide, please. All right, I'm going to move on now to discuss work-sharing procedures. So first of all, Access Consortium work-sharing is nowadays part of an agency's toolkit. So it really is part of a wider portfolio of different regulatory routes. I've used the example of Switzerland here. So obviously at the top, you've got your national standalone assessment, where an agency is essentially doing the full assessment, each module. And then you've got various other routes, for instance, reliance on the right side. And on the left side, you also have your access work-sharing procedures. So in general, it's worth noting here that agencies can benefit from a sustainable toolkit of regulatory pathways, including reliance, including work-sharing with the Access Consortium, including information exchange between agencies, and obviously also independent national reviews. Although I should add that when it comes to independent national reviews, meaning standalone assessments, that is usually the most resource intensive for any agency. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is another example here from another Access Consortium agency, in this case here, the MHRA. So this is an overview of the different MHRA regulatory routes. And as you can see here on the left side, you've got the Access Consortium work-sharing procedures for new actives, biosimilars, and generics. I've also included in this particular graph here the promise pathway. I appreciate the promise pathway is still at the pilot stage, but I've already included here just for completeness. And yeah, it is also worth noting that there really is no single best route. It really depends on what the product is and what the company's plans are, etc. Next slide, please. All right, a bit more about work sharing in the Access Consortium. So there are 3 different work streams for work sharing, namely for new actives, for generics, and for biosimilars. Although I should add that with regards to the biosimilars work stream, there's only been one product so far, one biosimilar so far that's gone through this process. One of the reasons also being is that there are a few differences with regards to the regulatory requirements for biosimilars between access countries. In any case, it's worth noting that work-sharing procedures are subject to sovereign decisions for each country. So it's still for each agency in each country to make their own decision at the end of a work-sharing procedure. And if you would like more information about the rules and operational procedures for work-sharing procedures, then please consult the agency's websites. Next slide, please. All right, so there are various reasons for agencies to work share, and also various reasons for companies to use access work sharing, which I mentioned on the next slide. So starting with the agencies on this particular slide here. So first of all, access members have equal status in terms of engagement and decision making. And if any agency has any reservations about participating in an assessment or an approval, they can always opt out if they wish. In terms of resourcing for new drug applications, the workload is simply split by CTD modules. So it's possible for agencies to save some resources there. They don't have to do everything. One common misconception is that all 5 jurisdictions always have to be included in an access work sharing procedure. That is not the case. Applicants can indeed choose from between 2 and 5 jurisdictions. And one really important point is, from a strategic perspective, access work sharing means that the agencies involved are usually more amongst the first wave of agencies that receive submissions for high-profile medicines from companies. So if you take a look at, for instance, Switzerland, with its relatively small population of only 9 million people, that can at least sometimes mean that Switzerland is not included in the first wave of submissions for high-profile medicines. But, if you work together with the Access Consortium, you actually bring that population base up to around 160 million. And that really gets you much closer to that first wave of agencies that are being targeted by companies. And obviously that first wave will usually include the FDA and the EMA. Next slide, please. Yeah, there are also reasons for companies to participate that are listed here. And by the way, this graph is taken from Innovative Medicines Canada. The reasons for companies to participate can range from having one single set of consolidated assessment questions and ranging to a near simultaneous approval in multiple markets. Next slide, please. Just briefly regarding the worksharing process. So it all starts with the submission of an expression of interest form or EOI form, which can be or which should be submitted to all of the 5 agencies. Afterwards, there might then be a joint meeting between the agencies and the sponsor where a roadmap for the review is being discussed. And it's also worth noting that when it comes to module 1 with the region-specific information, as well as the risk management plan, that is never part of the work sharing, meaning each agency will still have to assess that country-specific information by themselves. Next slide, please. All right, so this is a list of the Access Consortium approvals in Switzerland. As you can see here, at this point, it is quite a substantial list of products that have been approved in Switzerland, just to mention one example here. So you see around 20 products, and this is dated October this year, that have been approved through Access worksharing procedures. So these are all the new actives here on the left side, and on the bottom right side, you also see various generics that have been approved through Access worksharing procedures. Next slide, please. So one question is, of course, does Access Consortium work sharing actually work in practice? And I believe these metrics here, which are published, and these are always great publications by our colleagues at CIRS in London. So these metrics here really show in a very nice way that, yes, in general, Access work sharing does work. If you take a look at all of the agencies here, then you see that the median submission gap, meaning the time difference to EMA and FDA, is usually much shorter when you use Access worksharing procedures. And also the median approval time is shorter when you use Access worksharing. So, overall, I think, based on this particular slide, it can be concluded that, yes, Access worksharing leads to faster approvals and also hopefully quicker access by patients to these medicines here. Yeah, next slide, please. All right, so obviously when it comes to Access worksharing, there is a bit of additional coordination effort included here to coordinate the 5 agencies. Also, when it comes to TCs, those obviously have to take place across 5 time zones. But it is worth noting that those shortened submission gaps, as well as competitive approval times, usually outweigh those coordination efforts. One common challenge is also to conduct a peer review based on something another agency has assessed. Obviously, we're talking about the other modules for a new active, for instance, and therefore trust must be built between parties. And obviously that includes direct interactions and a lot of dialogue. And nowadays, the Access collaboration also does not just include work sharing, but it also has extended into post-marketing activities. We're discussing pharmacovigilance quite a bit, as well as inspection activities. And also the activities span nowadays from small to large molecules, including vaccines, and more recently also ATMPs. Furthermore, to make Access submissions more attractive to companies, we've also recently introduced a new fast-track assessment called the Promise Pathway, as shown on the next slide, please. Yeah, so this is a pilot for the new Promise Pathway. You can see the entry criteria for products to enter this fast-track assessment here at the bottom. So essentially, this is for medicines that target or that address unmet medical needs. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so I think overall it's clear that access worksharing has a lot of advantages, but I thought just to also balance this presentation out a little bit, it is worth noting that there are obviously still quite a few things that need to be addressed in the future. And of course, one thing that needs to be said here is obviously each access agency in each country still has their own legal framework. So as you can see here on the left side, in the UK, you've got your HMRs. In Canada, you've got your Food and Drug Act, and in Switzerland, you've got your Therapeutic Products Act as the main legal instruments for medicines. And obviously, those differences in legislation can at least sometimes lead to differences in terminology and product classification. For instance, with regards to what is classified as an ATMP, these differences can also lead to different statutory procedural timelines, in particular when it comes to, for instance, variations. It is worth noting that currently variations are not yet included in the access work sharing, with the exception of the extension of indication. But for instance, when you take a look at all of the quality variations, none of those are currently included in access work sharing procedures. So maybe that's something to think about in the future. In addition, there are also differences in local regulations and guidelines between access countries, for instance, when it comes to biosimilars. So just to mention one example here, if you take a look at the UK and biosimilars over there, then you'll notice that the UK will not require any confirmative phase 3 clinical trials anymore, whereas the other 4 access countries are still aligned with FDA and EMA and still require that data. So unlike the MHRA for the other 4 access countries, it will not be enough to only submit the quality data, including the comparability exercise and some PK data, but those 4 agencies out of the 5 access agencies will still require the confirmatory phase 3. So I would like to wrap up this presentation by saying that overall there's still a long way to go for access, but it's also clear, I would say, that working together with all of that collaboration that's going on, all of that dialogue, that increased harmonization and regulatory convergence will ultimately result in that going forward. We'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Leonard, for a very informative overview of the Access Consortium. I'd invite the panelists to turn on their video cameras, please, and throw to Janice to open up the panel session. Thank you.
Thank you, Tam, and thank you, Leonard. Really appreciate the opportunity and hearing about the Access Consortium and having you actually set the scene and the context for the discussion. Can we have the next slide, please? Oh, that's okay. Sorry, I thought we had a slide with the panelists on us. Apologies for that. So let's just go ahead and jump straight into the moderated panel session. What I'm going to do is ask if we can switch over to looking at the panelists on screen rather than the slide deck. And I would like to invite each panelist, if you wouldn't mind, just to introduce yourself and to just tell us a little bit about your role and experience with the Access Consortium to date. We do have a mix of representatives of the Access Consortium, national regulatory authorities, plus industry. So Leonard, you're at the top left of my screen. Let's start with you, and then we'll move on to Joel. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, so as I already mentioned, my name is Leo Both. I work for Swissmedic. For the last 10 years, I've worked for the MHRA. So this is already my second Access Consortium agency that I'm working for. I've done a lot of access work over the years, also with regards to coordinating, a lot of the discussions regarding vaccines. For instance, I mentioned that slide earlier about the variant vaccines. This is something that we had a lot of discussions about, obviously both at MHRA as well as at Swissmedic, and of course at the 2 other agencies too. Yeah, so I'll stop there for now. Yeah, thanks very much.
Okay, great. Joel?
Yeah, hi everyone. So my name's Joel Raffel. I'm a medical assessor at the MHRA. I've been here since 2018. My background was in neurology, but now one of my main roles at the MHRA is to represent us in the Access Consortium, specifically on new active substances. So I sit in the new active substance working group, We meet with colleagues from Switzerland, Canada, Singapore, and Australia, discuss with them, I liaise with companies, and I help to ensure the smooth running of the Access Consortium procedures at the MHRA. Thank you.
Great. So Michael and then Michelle, please.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name's Michael Wiseman. I'm the Assistant Secretary of TGA's International Regulatory Branch. I've been at had the great fortune of being a medicine regulator here in Australia and for a short period in Canada as well for nearly the last 30 years. So quite a bit of experience in this space. I was around when Access was first started back in the early or the mid 2000s. And I now, in my new role, support TGA, the head of our organisation, attend the heads of agency meetings and provide a lot of strategic direction to the organisation in what we do across Access. I have lots of thoughts and lots of opinions. Some of them are welcome, but some aren't. But that's okay. That's what we're all here for. So I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you, Michelle.
Everyone, I'm Michelle Cheng. I work in regulatory affairs at AbbVie covering the JPAC region. Working in industry, I think Access has always been something of a pipe dream we thought we would never reach. And here we are, many applications later. I've been involved in a couple of applications, 3-way, 4-way, 5-way even, for both new indications as well as for new drug chemical entities. So I guess my current role, I'm supporting the Industry Association in Singapore, working very closely with Helen there, as we advance dialogue in the space of access, thinking creatively how to work and evolve this work sharing, very valuable work sharing pathway, and see whether there are interlinkages and collaboration opportunities with even more innovation in this space moving forward. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And Helen and Freddie.
Hello, everyone. So Helen Critchley, Regulatory Head in Australia and New Zealand. I'm actually originally from the UK, and I think my concepts of work sharing is going back to looking at what happened when the EMA was first established. I'm that old, I can remember it very well. And the fact that you do need to work and evolve things, I think, Leonard really resonated with. This is still evolving. And I think as industry, if we want this to work and take us to, I think what Michelle said was our dream, it really is about partnering and looking at how we can work together and learn together from the experience of how to make it better.
Great, thank you. And Freddie?
Thanks, Janice. Hi, everyone. I'm Freddie from Singapore Health Sciences Authority. I'm a CMC team lead and regulatory consultant over here, and I've joined the agency since 2007. In 2013, I joined the NASWG, and it's been over 10 years, and I'm the current chair of the NASWG. And other than doing the coordination work as the HSA representative, I also participate in more than half a dozen access applications as the CMC evaluator. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And thank you to all of you for joining today. So I've got some questions ready to go, and I have actually put some names by them, but I would welcome you, if you weren't the one who has asked the question, feel free to jump in if you'd like to say something, and we will start with a discussion amongst you now, and then we will move to a Q&A with the audience towards the latter half. So invite those that are in the audience to use the Q&A function if you have any questions. So maybe start with you, Freddie, and Leonard as well. You mentioned in the presentation that everything is obviously collaborative work sharing, and that you do have ways and means for deciding who does what. So can you explain a little bit more about how does the Access Consortium actually work in practice? How do you divide your resources and decides who does what amongst the agencies?
Freddie, do you want to make a start?
Yeah, thanks, Leonard. Sure. When we receive an expression of interest from the companies, typically a discussion will be done between the access partners who are involved, identifying which agency has the capacity to take on the certain modules of the application. And essentially, it all depends on whether there's available capacity for the participating agencies for the decision on which agency to lead which module. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Freddie. That's really useful. As you already mentioned, it really depends on resources. Of course, there's also that aspect of how do you actually split up the dossier. And if there are 3 agencies, it's pretty simple because then you just split up module 3, 4, and 5. So each agency is doing one whole module. If there are 5 agencies included in a work sharing procedure, then you have to kind of work around that a little bit. But obviously, what you can do is you can split up safety and efficacy. So one agency is doing each, and then also with regards to the quality module, you can divide it into the active substance versus the finished product. And that means that if you do that, then you've got 5 chunks for 5 different agencies. So each agency is then doing roughly the same amount of work, which we're obviously aiming for. Next.
Okay.
Thanks, Leonard. That's what we did for the first 2 5-ways biologics and chemical applications. We split the active substance and the drug product into 2 agencies. And I understand that one of the products, there were 2 indications. So a different agency looked at a different indication. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Ray. That's really useful. One additional aspect is also, what happens to the inspections, who's in charge of doing the inspections. That's always a bit tricky, and I appreciate that, some agencies, they don't have that many inspectors, and, a lot of times the inspectors are already booked out for months to come. So that's usually also, one of those situations where you have to find some kind of compromise or some kind of solution. In general, it makes sense for the agency which assesses module 3 to then also go out on inspection, but that's not always possible. And then, some other agency might actually volunteer, and take this forward. Thanks very much.
That's a very interesting comment, Leo. Yeah, for HSA, we have a reliance approach with regards to the inspection. As you may know, HSA is part of the Pharmaceutical Inspection and Cooperation Scheme, and we do a risk-based evaluation for the site, and it may be a paper-based audit. So depending on the application and our experience with the manufacturer, the different requirements may apply for the GMP aspect. Over.
Thank you very much. My next question is to Joel, and again, others can join in. So once you've moved forward with this process, how are you communicating with the company or sponsor on how elements are going to move forward? And then my second question is, because I wasn't really sure, are the joint pipeline meetings a part of that process? And could you explain the benefit of that? Thanks.
Okay, I'll answer the first question first before coming to pipeline meetings. So for the MHRA, we work quite closely with the company throughout the Access Consortium procedure. So typically I'll have multiple emails with the company after receiving the expression of interest. I often have an informal chat to ask them whether they have any questions about how the procedure will run. The agencies all then get together to agree to the procedure, to work out who will assess module 3, 4, and 5, and will then communicate the timetable to the company so that before the procedure starts, they will know exactly when to expect the first and the second list of questions. The company will then have a date for which the dossier needs to be submitted to each agency, and we'll talk to them during that procedure to make sure that they're aware of any problems that occurred during validation. And then I guess the first major milestone is when they receive that first list of questions, which is usually on day 120. The company can then talk to us about any questions they have. Sometimes it's confusing for companies, especially if this is their first Access Consortium procedure, because in theory, they should have a single list of questions which covers every country. But sometimes there can be small differences between countries. For example, it might be that one of the questions the MHRA wants to raise, but Swissmedic doesn't happen to agree with that question, in which case that question may say this is MHRA specific. And so the company might want to ask how they interact with those questions and how they should respond. And then essentially a very similar thing happens in the second and the third round until we get to the national phase. Each agency should be communicating with their local applicant on the national phase to ensure that things are as ready as possible to be pushed through to grant once the work sharing has been completed. I'm happy to answer any clarifying questions on that. On the pipeline meetings, in a way, that's a separate issue. So if a company comes to us asking for a general pipeline meeting, the access agencies are usually very interested in holding those to understand what's coming up in the coming years. But we'll also have meetings relating to a specific product. So if a company has sent in an expression of interest, they want to move ahead with a work sharing procedure, we can hold logistical meetings to explain how that work sharing procedure will run, although often companies don't think that's necessary because our operational procedure describes how the procedures will run. And sometimes companies will also want to hold a technical meeting where we discuss the scientific content of the dossier, although usually nowadays that meeting happens with whichever agency is leading Module 5. I just wanted to add one thing on the previous question that Freddie and Leo had addressed, which is relates to peer review. So even if, let's say, the TGA are leading Module 5 for a specific procedure, the MHRA and all other agencies will still peer review that assessment of the TGA. And so ultimately, we are making a full sovereign decision for these access procedures, which is one of the key ways, I suppose, that this differs from the centralized procedure. It's possible for the MHRA to raise different questions from the other agencies. It's even possible in theory for us to reach different decisions, although in practice that is very unlikely since we're quite like-minded regulators with similar standards. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And I'd actually like to pick up on that last statement you made about similar standards. I would assume that, and Leonard, you mentioned this briefly in your presentation as well, that's where the importance of regulatory harmonization and convergence actually comes in. Maybe Freddie, Leonard, others have any thoughts about how regulatory harmonization helps with the Access Consortium?
Maybe I could just make a start with that question. Yeah, so just to mention one example here. So when you take a look at, for instance, how ATMPs are classified, then it might make sense to harmonize that a little bit more across the 5 access regions, because you take a look at, for instance, Swissmedic, just to mention one example here, and ATMPs in Switzerland would also include all of the nucleic acid-based vaccines, such as mRNA vaccines and adenoviral vector-based vaccines. That is certainly very different from the other countries. I mean, for instance, if you, by contrast, take a look at the UK, then you notice that the UK's definition of what an ATMP looks like is still very much aligned with the EMA. And in the other 3 jurisdictions, you also have differences. So, it certainly makes sense to sit down at some point, and then even if you have those differences, then you obviously still need to find common ground, in particular when it comes to, hopefully in the future also taking ATMP forward in a work sharing procedure. So then it really becomes important to try and find some common ground to be able to agree on, okay, what kind of product would, for all 5 agencies included, would really constitute an ATMP. And obviously, that is kind of the first step. Over time, the hope is at least that, you can actually agree more and more on what product classes comprise, etc. Similar regulatory requirements, so that, obviously this is in the future, but at some point, the idea is that, you're so aligned that you can pretty much take any kind of product class forward together, for instance, in a work sharing procedure and stuff like that.
I have some perspective to share with regards to the CMC review. Having participated in quite a number of the access procedures, I noticed that most of the access partners are all aligned to the ICH and the usual EMA and FDA requirements for CMC. Hence, the country-specific aspects are kept to a minimum. I see it working quite well, and maybe like for Singapore, we are in a slightly different climatic region, being a bit hotter and wetter than the rest of the access partners. We may we will have to assess the stability of the drug product under the ASEAN climatic condition, which is 30 degrees and 75% relative humidity. If we are not the one leading the CMC review, we will probably indicate to the access partner that channel of communication is always available. Like for the examples, the quality evaluators do have the contacts of their counterparts over at the other agencies, and we'll can easily drop a note to indicate that we may require that piece of information to be reviewed. Alternatively, our evaluator may also look at a particular aspect, i.e. the stability of the product under that climatic condition, to conduct an independent review for the aspect if it's not covered by the primary review. Over.
All right, thank you. Anyone else want to make a comment on that question or anything? All right, I'm going to move over to the industry side now and start with Michelle and then some input from Helen too. So what influences a company to actually file with the Access Consortium versus using other collaborative procedures or national pathways?
So thanks for the question, Janice. I think a lot depends on which are the strategic markets for that particular product and therefore infer which countries would be prioritized. So where it does make sense, for example, we would definitely consider access consortia amongst other work sharing and other innovative pathways for securing approval. We look very closely at the predictability of any pathway. So I think having that aspect flagged out with what Joelle was referring to, clear dates on when we expect the first list of questions, second list of questions, a target submission timeframe, and finally a decision by the national authorities. Increased transparency as well on how health authorities have performed in previous applications. I think there's immense potential for more to come on board in access, especially in the industry. I think currently less than half of the companies or applicants on our survey, the Industry Association survey, have experience in access. And part of that is the fear, right, of the unknown. What do we know about previous applications that have gone through? Are we confident in the labels that will come up? Are they competitive versus the local landscape? And based on my personal experience with the applications, that hold true, right? We got different indications approved in the end of the day, but they were all robust based on the competitive landscape. So that was for us very attractive. We like the concept of a streamlined review in a sense that one dossier goes in. There was no duplication of submissions, of customized dossiers beyond the country requirements that are specific to each country. So largely one dossier could be essentially replicated across all 5 jurisdictions. We also very attracted to the time frame. So many of the countries we do see either no less worse off or a little bit of acceleration. We hope and we always aspire as an industry association to see if more could be done in this aspect to have more competitive timeframes built in. But in general, that's the essence of why we are very keen on access as a procedure in general. I'll hand it over to Helen to add on any additional comments.
Yeah, I think we would certainly have exactly the same views. Perhaps also just comment on a couple of tips. I think, Joel, you shared about the logistics meeting. I think you've never done access before as a company, and there's no commitment to file if you have a logistics meeting. You can sort of go and learn something if you're not sure in that dialogue. But once you've done a couple of logistic meetings, I think we've done a large number of access now. It's really quite predictable with the sort of timetables of things and how you can plan that out. My other tip would be, don't assume just because you can't see something in a guideline that things aren't possible. I think my message would be, this is very much an evolving pathway. And sometimes if you make a call and sort of have a discussion, look, we've got this type of application, it's not in your guidelines, what do you think? We've often found some really good dialogue. It might not be here now, but it might be something you could do later. And I think certainly the Access Promise pilot is a great example of that constant evolution, that certainly when we're looking at where is the interest from the industry survey, not having a harmonized way to get a sort of one-stop shop for a priority review assessment was actually something that was quite important to industry. So that constant evolution, I think, is the other thing I'd say is keep your eyes open. I'd say keep your mind open. And I think to pick up on your point, Michelle, is why were companies who'd never actually tried the procedure a little bit concerned? It was definitely divergent opinions, but I think it is important to recognise that access is an independent decision by the countries. I think it comes back to what you were talking about before, the importance of alignment. I think one day industry's dream is the same dossier would almost get you the same result in a much more predictable way. I think that would be our ultimate dream. But also sort of concerns about resources and cost, because I think it was mentioned at the beginning that it is a little bit more to coordinate. I would come back to the point about anything that's new always takes a little bit of time to learn. But if you're not willing to invest in learning or exploring or trying, you may actually ignore an opportunity to be part of creating something together. It's only through our feedback and working together that we can actually make the process better. So if you don't tip your toes in, I think you probably have less an opportunity to contribute to what makes it better, and you'll sort of maybe miss an opportunity to learn something quicker. I think during COVID, it's also important, I think, when you look at metrics, access was going through the COVID period. And during that period, we know that everything slowed down because the COVID vaccines were the priority. So as you're looking historically at where were the benefits, I think you also just need to be conscious about what time frame you're looking at when making that assessment before you decide, okay, it looks like it's a little bit slow or not. But I think I certainly hear from the regulators the importance of the CIS publication, and I think for our global counterparts, that's certainly something that is looked at quite closely. So yeah, that perhaps gives a little bit of a perspective as to how we view the process.
Thank you for that. And I want to pick up on something that Joel and Michelle both said, and it's about predictability. So my question is for you, Michael. When looking at the Access Consortium, how are you balancing flexibility, transparency, and predictability when it comes to working together and I guess other potential indicators for success? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it comes as no surprise that holy grail of flexibility and predictability, the constant tension that those two things want. And I think what's often not recognised is that as regulators, we also want flexibility and predictability, and it's a two-way street. So how do we do it? At the moment, I think it's fair to say that our predictability measures need some focus to improve, and it won't come as a surprise that when you see the next strategic plan for 25 to 28, that there's a very key output there in terms of, or objective, to improve some of those predictability measures. So we've heard that message, we understand it, but I think it's how we do it. And picking up on the points that Helen was making, which I think are very valid, is access. These types of collaborations are very challenging to establish, but the rewards that they offer are very, very important to our communities. So access as a consortium is very much a priority for the governments of the 5 countries that we're all a part of, for the heads of the agencies that we're a part of, and making us really a regulator of choice, or a pathway of choice, is very much the goal and will continue to be the goal. There's a lot of challenges ahead. I think personally, my own views are, I think we've got 15 years of experience to look at and go, have we got the models right? Are we doing things the right way, or do we need to make some slight tweaks? And that's both internally and externally. So the couple of examples there I think about, is it a fit for purpose model to have evaluators and assessors that have their domestic day jobs, and then we're asking them to come in and do things in an international context, which puts them in quite a different mindset? And working in a different way. You heard from Dr. Felicity Jameson. She's part of my branch and the regulatory strengthening program. When we first started that back in 2018, we had a very different model to what we have now to make that work. And it's only through those constant trying, listening, getting the information, adjusting, and constantly doing that you can get a model that actually works. So I think there's some work that we can do that. What can we do to build the trust between the regulators in the 5 countries that are geographically dispersed in horrible time zones that make it very challenging to collaborate and work together? And picking up on the points of this peer review business. I mean, ideally, we'd be in a position where we had enough trust where the level of peer review would be absolutely minimal. I mean, if our collaborative effort means that all we've done is generated another report to add on top of the assessors' reports that they've already got a review, then have we really created any time savings in that? So I think there's some things we can learn in that as well. Also, have we got the right information from industry to help us with our planning? You know, we heard from the WHO today talk about reliance. I haven't met a regulator or been in a regulatory environment where the regulator is not trying to rely. We all have reliance practices and a willingness to maximise reliance. But what are the challenges of reliance? Well, you can only rely if you have access to trusted information, if you can understand and know how to use that information that you're obtaining, and then be able to use it in a way that gives you a savings. So, you know, reliance takes many, many forms, and information sharing, report sharing, and work sharing, they're all different aspects of reliance. Have we got that right? As regulators, we hold on to what we call confidential information. We all have this information. And I think there's a time for a more mature conversation with the industry that says, really, what is that information? And is it really that commercially sensitive that we can't share it with another trusted partner to help make an accelerated decision? So I think I warned you all before. I have many opinions and many thoughts, and I apologise for going down many little rabbit holes here. But I think there's in all of these questions that I'm posing, I think there's a lot of excitement that sits at the end of it, and I think there's a lot of opportunities for us as a collective to make these pathways and these mechanisms work for both the citizens of our countries that we're looking for, or all the citizens of our countries that we're working towards, and the industry as well. So it's a true partnership. I don't think we've managed to get it right yet, but I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing and the direction we're going in.
Great, thank you for that. Anybody else want to add any comments to that? Okay, so I did hear you mention, Michael, and I do appreciate that balancing, you know, flexibility and transparency in those elements, with the aim of making the Access Consortium the regulatory pathway of choice. So I'd like to ask maybe Joel and Freddie, in addition to what Michael has said, what do you think will help to make the Access Consortium the pathway of choice for industry, and how do you think that's going to help address the submission gap with the EU and the US?
I can go first here, Freddie. So we want it to be a pathway of choice. For the MHRA, at least, it doesn't need to be the pathway of choice for every single application. And really what we want to offer is a array of different options for the company to choose the right pathway for the right products. So the reason we want the Access Consortium pathway to be prominent in companies' minds is because it allows new active substance applications to come to us early. It allows us to benefit from work sharing, learning from other agencies, collaborating with other agencies. It helps our resources compared to a full national application, because obviously there is some time saving involved if another agency leads the assessment of some modules. And for a company, it should mean that instead of having 5 different list of questions from 5 different agencies, they have a single list of questions, and it helps them. By helping the company, it's also often improving the quality of responses that we get, because the company is able to focus on that single list of questions instead of having to copy and paste someone else's answer into our question, which was actually slightly different. How do we encourage companies to use the pathway? I mean, to some extent, it's a case of time and learning, and we are seeing an increase in the number of submissions as companies gain confidence. If we can prove to companies that this is a reliable and predictable pathway where we meet our timelines and we send the single list of questions as promised, then word will get out and companies will see this as a regulatory route that should be prominent in their mind. That said, we're not trying to get rid of our straightforward national procedure, and for some applications, it might be more appropriate to go for a straightforward national procedure. And similarly, we're not trying to get rid of our reliance pathways, and we do need our reliance pathways, and those will be the right procedures for other applications. Thanks.
Thanks, Joel. I'd like to echo Joel's comment about making this access the pathway of choice, because over here at HSA, we do have other reliance pathways, and I think we are one of the pioneers with our verification route, our bridge route, and our full pathways. So as long as there's the experience of the access work sharing is regularly shared with the industry, and I think the word of mouth goes around, I believe more and more companies will be encouraged to file their submissions through this pathway. For those of you in the audience who have not tried it before, it may be worth giving a shot at this. And as with more experience, I think this can become a more sustainable route of submission for most companies. And this does provide a time savings as compared to the other full pathways, as you have seen in your slide. Thanks.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. So Helen, I'd like to ask you, listening to Joel and Freddie just now talking about how and if we can make the access pathway a regulatory pathway of choice, of one of the several that are out there. Are there any practical recommendations or learnings from the industry side that could help take that forward?
Yeah, I mean, we've touched a lot about predictably, flexibility, and speed. I think right now, perhaps the one area that I think industry would love to see, I mean, we talked about a consolidated list of questions, but we do still have, and you know, it's a shame they're not here, Health Canada, the rolling approach that we've seen from Health Canada. We've been dreaming that would end one day, and we sort of hear that it might happen soon. But I think just for simplicity, it really needs to be the one approach by all 5. And so I think, you know, as Michael was sort of saying, it's still an evolving process, but I think those differences, and perhaps even, you know, Leonard, things like the ATM pathways, the biosimilar, any differences, I think that's the thing that we need to get that alignment and harmonization on. I think like everything, as it's been evolving, the guidance has been developing. And I know when we did our survey, I think the guidance and the transparency of the dialogue is really important to industry. I still think there's perhaps not the 100% there on the clarity of the guidance for someone who's never done the process before, but I think guidance can always be improved over time. And certainly for the promised pathway, I think you have sort of put forward suggestions to do a clarifying, you know, FAQ essentially, because I think if you've never done access and the promise was the first thing you're looking at, that's probably quite challenging to get your head around from looking at it the first time. But again, as we've said, it's a pilot. The one thing in a pilot, you know, personal experience is And, all credit to the TGA, incredibly collaborative. If you call and you need advice, I think it's about having that willingness to discuss. And I think, Joel, that was something you particularly emphasised that the MHRA are willing to do. I'm sure the other agencies are the same. So it comes back to, if you're not sure, reach out, ask the questions, and personal experiences, we've never found a pushback or anything. There's very much a willingness to work with you to help clarify. And sometimes there is no answer. It hasn't been done before. And then I think the choice is yours. Are you willing to go in that sort of pilot mindset? And not everyone is, and I think, Joel, your point around the right pathway for the right product and your right strategy, that's probably never going to change. And it's sort of really what you said at the beginning, Michelle, it's not a utopia, but I do sort of like what I'm hearing from as regulators work together. And, I love the sense of the word of mouth, the word will get round. And I think that's absolutely true. As more people sort of do it and get more experience, that's what you'll see. So for us, the ongoing collaboration, actually one of the challenges has been, where does industry find the opportunity to have the dialogue? And this has been a wonderful opportunity to hear representatives from the consortium, but we have been from the industry side asking some sort of opportunity where the heads of agencies could perhaps meet with the 5 industry associations once a year to really share that best practice experience. And it can be challenging, but we believe there's a sort of way we could do that and add real value. So that's probably, Janice, at the moment where we see some of the things we'd aspire to see improve, etc.
Thank you, Helen, and I appreciate that. So I'd like to ask one final question before we move to the Q&A with the audience. And if you want to take a look at the Q&A box, you'll have a opportunity to see what's coming your way. But Leonard and Michael, I wanted to ask you before we move into that next part of our session, if you were in front of several national regulatory authorities who were thinking of starting a collaborative work sharing program with colleagues in other countries, what would you tell them? What would you talk to them about your experience? And maybe there's some watch outs, maybe there's some positives. Just like to hear from your perspective what you would say to them. Thank you.
Where to start? So maybe what I can add at this point is we actually had those kind of discussions with some representatives from the ASEAN network, who are, as you probably know, there's a collaboration between 10, I believe, agencies in Asia. And they were actually also consulting a little bit with us how we are running the Access Consortium. And I mean, there are various aspects to point to. I mean, it's probably not a bad idea to start with the different work streams. I think that's probably a good starting point, also to see what does work sharing look like, what does the information exchange look like for some of the other work streams that don't include work sharing, and then take it from there. And of course, for other agencies and also for companies, it's always a good idea to take a look at the agency's websites and also the new Access Consortium website, where a lot of that information is detailed. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm actually doing something very similar at the moment with some countries that I won't be naming, but I think it's a couple of things. So the importance of governance. Having the right, the authority from the government and the organisation, the government of the day, and the heads of ministries who are giving that authorising environment to participate. Very, very important. There are legal elements that you need to work through. It sounds very bureaucratic, but it allows you to actually be in a situation where you can exchange information and do it the right way. Having a really compelling why, the rationale for why you want to join a consortium and what you can get out of it. To be realistic about the timeframes and the ambitions that you're having for it. The need for solid and long and really never-ending trust building, because people within agencies will continually move, and the trust is critically important. The alignment, not harmonization, but the alignment and convergence of requirements, boring things like templates, guidance documents, all these things, very, very important. And then things like, you know, your measures of success that you're having, you know, in our strategic plans and whatever. But I think a really important side of Access is having those heads of agencies coming together on a regular basis and driving the work. But that said, there are issues that we've got with that, and I call it the missing middle. So in Access, we have the heads of agencies meeting, and we have at the working groups, and usually they're technical experts, such as my colleagues who are on here tonight. But there is a layer in between of management, between the heads and the technical experts. And that missing middle, if that missing middle is not strongly engaged, cares, and is invested in what the outcomes are, you won't get the improvements and the right sorts of questions being asked of the working group to feed up to the heads of agency so that loop needs to be there. I've probably talked too much, but there are a few things to think about.
No, thank you very much. And this has been a great discussion. I'd like to move on to the audience Q&A now, and also let the panelists know that if you'd like to type any answers to these, feel free. And let's just start at the top. So the first question is, since the Access ATMP working group has been established, are there any successful examples where the work sharing initiative has resulted in market approval? And where can we find information on updates for these approvals? Who would like to take that one? Just jump right in.
Well, I think the simple answer is no. I think the ATMP working group is a very new working group. I think it's fair to say that working group is still in a exploratory stage where we are learning to understand each other's systems and how things work, the similarities and differences. So we haven't yet explored that to the full extent. And I would say that's where things are at with that particular working group, but others jump in if I've misrepresented that.
Okay, in the same vein, let's go to the question on post-approval changes. The question is, will Access consider to include complex major post-approval changes in its scope in the near future? Example, PACMP.
Maybe I can take that question. That's actually a really useful question right now, because that was one of the big points that was discussed just 1 month ago at the CMC Strategy Forum in Rotterdam. And it was noticed that IFPMA, just to mention one example, they've got this pilot right now where they're actually including PACMPs. And it was interesting to see that a lot of the agencies working together within that IFPMA project were actually Access agencies. So I would say that in general, this is a very good idea, in particular when it comes to step 1 of the 2 steps that are usually included for a PACMP, namely the protocol itself. I think there is definitely some room there for Access to work together. The good thing is also, if you only work together on step 1 for PACMP, this has the advantage that a lot of variations, for instance, they are directly related to supply considerations. A lot of agencies, they're in a situation where quality variations have to be proved relatively quickly, at least at times, because agencies and countries need those particular products. But because we're just talking about step 1 of a PACMP, meaning just the protocol itself, you don't really have those constraints on supply at that point. So I think this would be a really good way forward for Access to work together. Having said that, though, it is not something that we've done yet. But this is certainly something to consider. I personally feel, and this is just a personal opinion, of course, that this is something we should certainly consider in the next year or 2. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Great.
I'll just add on that too. Sorry, in the next strategic plan, expanding the life cycle approach is something that we have included in there. But I would preface that also to say that this will be an iterative process, so don't expect it to be a clear measure in that next one. So, yeah, I think we want to get the things that we're doing well, we want to do those well. And I don't think before we get too many plates spinning in the air, I think we run the risk of spinning too many plates and everything dropping. So I think we've got to be a little bit more strategic about what we do take on.
Okay, great. Freddie, did you have a comment?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael, for commenting about having too many plates in the air. We did discuss the possibility of having line extensions, which are on top of the NE and the NCs for the access. And that we do understand that resources are also constrained over at the end, and it will be most cost effective for our manpower to be utilized on the new entities. So for now, CMC changes post approval will probably be not considered in the near future. However, not to disappoint anyone, we do receive PACMP and assorted changes proposed in the regional submissions for the access submissions. And I think if most of the agencies do have this procedure in place, we can consider assessing these PACMPs at the registration phase together. And I think that can be the first step to help view a possible pathway for these to be jointly reviewed. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'm looking at one of the more popular questions, and it's about what are the plans for the Access Consortium in providing assessment reports to be used by other countries to apply reliance stemming out from the Worksharing collaboration. Anyone want to take that one on?
I'm very happy to, but I'm also looking to my other colleagues to, because I feel like I'm jumping in on a lot of these things. But basically, the decision to put a reliance mechanism in place is up to each individual agency to determine what that looks like. There's nothing stopping any agency. I'm assuming that the question is relating to the Access has done something, and then there's another country who wants to use the Access report. So if that's the situation, then it's completely up to those other countries to determine if the Access report is suitable for their needs or not, and whether they want to rely on it. The question then becomes, as I said before, how do they understand the reports? Can they interpret the information? Do they know what to do with it? And as we know, there are often many questions associated with someone using your report, and then what's the ability for that third regulator or that third party to come to you and seek clarifying questions. And I guess that's the little challenges that we the practicalities of doing these sorts of things. Reliance is a very easy word to say, but it's a very difficult thing to do in reality.
Freddie?
Thanks.
And
thanks,
Joel.
Michael. I'd like to chime in that we have discussed this also at NASWG about the sharing of the evaluation reports. So currently, the access partners are in agreement, and we only share the portions which we have done the review on. So for example, if HSA has done the CMC review, and if another third-party agency approaches HSA to share the particular product, we will only be able to share the CMC aspect of the report with that agency, and they must approach the other access partners who have done the clinical and the non-clinical review for permission to obtain the other aspects of the report. So reliance may be a little bit tricky in my opinion for such cases, but we have done it before. For some of the cases which we have previously participated in, we have shared our reports with a third party upon request, as they are filing it through Reliance for registration. Thank you.
Joel, you had your hand raised earlier.
I was going to say something similar to Freddie in that we already do send out the assessment reports for the modules that we lead. So if the MHRA leads Module 5, we will send out the Module 5 assessment report to the company. If Canada leads Module 5, of course, the MHRA doesn't want to send out the Canadian assessment report to the company, because that's Health Canada's responsibility to make sure that they're sending out whatever they should send out according to their national guidelines. And so for the company, it might get a bit tricky in that you'll have a Module 3 assessment report from one agency, a Module 4 assessment report from a different agency, and a Module 5 assessment report from a third agency. And whether that hodgepodge of different assessment reports can be accepted for reliance by a different regulator is up to that different regulator. It would be hard for us to say, it would be hard for us to give Module 3, 4, and 5 assessment reports in the same format because of the nature of how our work sharing works.
If I could quickly clarify the question, comment that Joelle made. So would that mean that health authorities, upon request, could share the assessment report with the health authority that was requesting it? So it would be a health authority transfer of assessment reports, or would it be to the applicant who requested for it? Because that's some differences, I think.
So for the MHRA, we will send out the assessment reports to the company as routine. So when you get the round 1 list of questions, it will be accompanied by the MHRA assessment report for the module that we have led. And I think different agencies have slightly different practices there.
Okay.
You know, one of the questions maybe to follow on, you know, we've been talking about is, once the Access Consortium decision and collaboration has been made, what then happens at the national level? You know, you've talked about how each agency has a sovereign decision to accept or reject or do something else. How does that normally work?
So I could go first here. So the national phase is essentially just finalizing the procedure, doing whatever still needs to be done. So at the MHRA, it's usually quite short, especially if you've had a high quality dossier where the vast majority of questions have already been answered. The national phase often takes less than 30 days, sometimes 10 or 15 days. And it's essentially a compliance check to make sure that everything is in the right place and is ready for grant. There are, shall we say, less good quality dossiers, especially if the product information has not yet been agreed by the assessors. Product information is assessed nationally, of course, because we all have different requirements for product information. And so sometimes during that national phase, the assessors will still have to go back and forth with the company to agree a finalized product information, and that can then delay the national phase. But hopefully for a good quality submission with a company who's engaging throughout the procedure, hopefully the product information will have already been agreed before we reach that national phase. Thanks.
Perhaps I can add on. I think when we look across the 5 countries, the efficiency with which the national phase is done, which is separate to work sharing, is certainly, I think, that within each individual country, we see opportunities for simplification. And, you know, coming from Australia, I think the fact that we can end up in an advisory committee situation, having been through, you know, in theory, up to 5 regulators, can be a little bit frustrating for industry, that you've got this other extra piece there that happens after that. So I know Michael will smile that, you know, our dream is that we can sort of align to be a bit more aligned with, as I would, coming from myself, the UK and so European way of having that early advice if you need advisory committee there. But I think they're not linked to work sharing. But I think if you're a company thinking about doing access, it is something that you do need to think of about how the national phase may impact part of your strategy. And we probably didn't mention that before, did we, Michelle? But I think you know, the MHRA are seen as actually a very fast resolution, which makes your timelines look more attractive than maybe some of the other countries in that national phase.
Thank you. So another question that has popped up is around conditional data. And the question is why not? is the Access Consortium not looking at conditional data leading to conditional approval? Any thoughts?
Yeah, it's actually really, really difficult to take forward anything, in between the access partners that's related to either conditional or temporary authorizations. One of the reasons also being that those authorizations differ a little bit between the various countries. So if you take a look at Switzerland, you've got a temporary authorization there, whereas in the UK, you've got a conditional authorization. Is that really the same? I think that's certainly worth debating. Also, how long these approvals are valid for might differ. Just to give you one example, I understand that Australia has a provisional registration, which I believe is valid for 2 years. In the UK, you've got a conditional MAA, which is valid for 1 year. So if you want to take these kind of procedures forward, what do you do with, for instance, any conditions that are being raised? In the UK, a company would have only 1 year to address all the conditions that were raised. In Australia, it would be 2. So that would make things certainly much more difficult. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. Fair point. So just before we go into the last question to kind of wrap up this Q&A, we have some Zoom poll questions we'd like to launch for the audience, and I didn't want to scare the speakers by not reminding them that we put some together. So just want to flag that those are going to come up next. But maybe to wrap up this session, a set of questions for both regulators and industry, and maybe a little bit different. So for the regulators, I'd like to hear from each of you as Access Consortium partners. What does the future of access look like for you? And the second part of that question, and it links into some of the questions in the Q&A, is any future partners on the waiting list to join the Access Consortium, whether or not that's been discussed. And then maybe for Michelle and Helen, as we contemplate the future of the Access Consortium, any thoughts, any advice for industry, or advice for the regulator partners on keeping the Access Consortium to evolve and be a successful regulatory pathway of choice? Shall we start with Leonard and Joel first?
Thanks, Janice. So with regards to potential additional partners, let me just say upfront that, of course, there are lots of very competent agencies out there. I think it's clear that it's really useful for all of the 5 agencies here to also collaborate, at least individually, also with other very, very competent agencies in the world. Having said that, though, I believe one of the strengths of Access is actually its relatively small size, with only 5 agencies, which allows us to move relatively quickly. And we've seen that when we put together the guideline on variant vaccines. That was a project that had to be put together very quickly. And I think because only 5 agencies were involved, that really allowed us to drive things forward. So that's the first question. With regards to the future of access, I think the overall topic is more collaboration overall, and that could include first of all more products coming through work-sharing procedures. I think for the last 10 years we had around 40 applications, so there's certainly, I think, some room there to increase that number. And also with regards to collaboration, to work also more together on all kinds of other issues that don't necessarily involve work sharing, just to kind of, move towards that regulatory convergence and harmonization over time. I'll stop there.
So to agree with Leonard, we need a steady broadening of the scope of what the Access Consortium deals with. So we've talked about post-approval variations, or ATMPs, or thinking about how we can work together with those more tricky products like conditional MAs. I don't have an easy answer for any of those, but the slow and steady broadening of the scope is obviously something that we should strive for. while also delivering on our bread and butter and really proving to industry that we do meet our timelines and that this is a reliable and predictable route to go down. Thanks.
Great. Michael and Freddie?
Freddie, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, for me, I think about adding more access partners. We took about, say, 12, 13 years for the access partners to be comfortable with each other to this extent that we are having this work sharing and free flowing of information across the evaluators. I think adding on new partners, while I don't think it's impossible, but I think it may be challenging because this new partner we will have to gain experience and gain the comfort to do work sharing with the new partner. And as for my dream for access, at least for Singapore submissions, I hope that access becomes the pathway of choice whenever a company is thinking of making a full dossier submission in Singapore. Yeah, thank you. Over to you, Michael.
Thanks, Freddie. In terms of future partners, the access terms of reference actually has a statement on this in terms of that we won't be looking to expand access in the near future following the inclusion of UK MHRA relatively recently. The heads and the agencies feel that 5 is a good number for now. And that we won't be looking to expand in the near future. But that's not to say that there won't be expansions in the future. It's just not on the radar in the near future. In terms of what does the future look like for access, so you might need to stop me. I'm pretty excited about what the opportunities that access have, but I'm also very pragmatic about what needs to happen. We've been 16, 17 years so far. We've made some great change, great advances. We've done some great things, but I think there is a need for a far greater and a more conscious review of what we actually have learnt and what we've experienced. So there might need to be a consolidation of some of the things that we're doing. I know when we're saying expanding, but I think you expand once you've got things working well. And I think we've heard very clearly from the industry, as well as we have heard from our regulator counterparts, that predictability is a key aspect to this on both sides. And I don't think we've got the predictability piece right just yet. So how do we go about doing that? It might be things like we need to say no as a regulator. We might need to say no to some applications. That is counterintuitive to what we're trying to do and what we're trying to say right now. But if we can't make a promise and deliver on that promise, then we run the risk of jeopardizing the trust with the industry and the people that we're trying to work with. So I think we've got to get that balance right. I think we've got to look at the models of operating, as I said before, but that's a pretty exciting space to be in as well. I would see a future where there are dedicated resources within each agency that are dedicated to doing international work sharing projects. That's their business. That's their core day to day. They can focus on these issues. They can focus on improving the aspects of these mechanisms so that we can get all the things that we're looking for. And in terms of sort of next steps, I think continuing to engage with the industry is a really, really important part of us getting it right. We can't just be talking within ourselves or between ourselves, amongst ourselves. We need to be expanding those networks and doing functions like this. I really like Helen's suggestion about the once a year the heads meet with the heads of the medicines industry associations. That's the sort of stuff we need to be doing. And then we need to be doing far more work with those people who are engaging and taking the risks to engage with the access consortium processes so that we can learn from it. But exciting, I think, is the word that I look for it, and I'm very optimistic as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it's really good to hear that, you're all of you are dedicated and passionate about, making sure that the Access Consortium continues to evolve and involve in a good direction, and that's greatly appreciated. So Michelle and Helen, to wrap up this session, just comments from your side, thoughts?
Maybe I could go first, Helen, and then you can close us out. Okay, so for me, I think the key message really for the industry is have a go, get some experience. I think you would then only understand, I think, where we're trying to grow access as a pathway of choice, right? I know many of industry colleagues are hesitant. There is an immense effort actually internally to sell the access pathway to your management, to give it a chance. Reach out to your industry associations. It's my second message. There's a lot of experience as a collective within each industry trade association, which I think we can only get stronger if we have more and more collective experience. As Helen said, each of us represent all the 5 trade associations. We have come together in a really nice way this past 2 years to look at publications, engagement of health authorities. And I think this is something that will continue definitely in the near future. It will never go away. It will only grow. I thank Michael for the comment that we're looking forward to more dialogue. And that's my third message. Thank you for the openness today, for the dialogue. To know that it's not perfect, but we're not seeking perfection here. We're seeking improvement, constant improvement and growth. So a big thank you for inviting me again, and for Helen to be here, and for all the regulators to come together. I think it's a very meaningful discussion and dialogue. So thank you again. Helen, over to you.
Well, I'll perhaps finish off with just that future horizon thinking, really looking what's on the horizon and the word predictability, because I think the thing I see as we really accelerate R&D and increase our probability of success with AI is as we increase our load right now with the access, it's not guaranteed. When we put in an expression of interest, you can say no if you haven't got the capacity. I think, how do we work together? Because as we accelerate, we need to find that sort of guarantee. So I'm going to come to access, I'm going to get the countries I want, on the timelines I want. And I think that requires a lot of dialogue, because the speed with which things are changing, I think, is a challenge just of all. And that, combined with the need for that full life cycle management, I think ultimately for access to be truly competitive with the centralized procedure and the other ways that we see things managed, is full life cycle management, where it could really be, a one application, one set of questions throughout the life cycle. I think that would be the ultimate dream. But we understand the constraints, etc. But I think there is also a need for speed with which the agencies really think about how they can be ready for the future. It's a challenge we're facing in industry, things getting faster. And I think we really need to partner to create the future together. I think, thank you, Michael, for your enthusiasm and excitement. And, just to reiterate, Michelle, I think this has been a wonderful opportunity to just openly share what we've learned so far.
Great, thank you so much. You've been an absolutely wonderful panel. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to ask questions of you as well as the audience, so greatly appreciated. I'm not sure if folks are able to do emoticons and emojis with the Zoom platform, but I would just really like to express the thank you for taking your time today and being with us. It's been greatly appreciated. So thank you so much to our panel. And we will now wrap up day 1 of the conference. And I think, today it's really been an opportunity to hear what regulators, what WHO and others have been doing around regulatory reliance, work sharing and collaboration. It's really been about, bringing the innovations that we have in medicines and vaccines to patients. So it's been a great 3 hours this morning, and hearing those perspectives, setting the scene, building the context, and then looking at how that collaboration can actually be put into practice with the Access Consortium. And I've really appreciated today's conversation. So before everybody goes, a couple of things. We'd like to talk to you a little bit about day 2. And we'd ask everybody to please join us tomorrow. We're going to focus on reliance case studies and lessons learned across the product lifecycle, focusing on PACs and GMPs. So please do join us. Please register if you haven't done that. We'd also like you to take a minute of your time now to fill in an online survey. Should literally just take you about 60 seconds to let us know what you thought about today's conference, what you thought about the discussion, and if you have any advice for future iterations of the Asia Regulatory Conference. And again, a big thank you to all the speakers and the presenters today, as well as to everybody behind the scenes in making the ARC first day successful. And to TAM and Medicines Australia for collaborating as well. Thank you so much and have a good day.